there since about July. If you will, open your psalm book to number 795, 795, Wonderful Man of Galilee. Tim's going to lead that, and then after that, Brother Dale's going to lead us in our prayers. First time I heard this song was on the Sea of Galilee. Everett Hufford taught it to us, and I don't know how well we all know it, but we're going to try to sing it now.
The first I ever heard it too was when I was with Tony on the Sea of Galilee. I've never led this song, so if I mess up, that we'll never know it, right? All right, let's sing the first and last verses. I met him one day on the lonely road, the Christ of Galilee was there, and he lifted my heavy load, the sand of Galilee. Wonderful Man of Galilee, wonderful Man of Galilee, he's dearer than all the world to me. This wonderful Man of Galilee. Someday is coming again for me, this Man of Galilee. Transformed in His glorious face, I'll see this Man of Galilee. Wonderful Man of Galilee, wonderful Man of Galilee, he's dearer than all the world to me. This wonderful Man of Galilee.
Let us pray together. Our God and our Father in heaven, Father, we're so thankful that you are our God. We're thankful, Father, for your sacrifice of your only begotten Son on the cross for the sins of the world. And we're so thankful, Father, for this congregation and this opportunity and privilege we have to assemble ourselves together to study another portion of thy word, that it might be implanted in our minds, that in the end, that you might tell us, enter in our new and faithful servant. Father, we pray that you would be with Tony as he guides us through the word this morning. In Jesus we pray. Amen.
We'll go ahead and open your Bibles now to the book of Proverbs, to chapter 28. Proverbs chapter 28, and we'll pick up with verse 28. As I study through the book of Proverbs, I realize how much I do not know, and I realize how much greatness there is in the teachings of Solomon, and hopefully all of us can be able to learn from what Solomon has written. There's sometimes multiple applications you can make to some of these principles that are found here. And so we want to begin with verse 28 of chapter 28. That's all we lacked of the 28th chapter, and then we'll move into chapter 29 this morning. Okay. When wicked men arise, men hide themselves. But let me go back. When wicked men arise, men hide themselves, but when they perish, the righteous increase. Now, this is very similar to two other proverbs that Solomon has given. In chapter 28 and verse 12, which we studied a couple weeks ago, when the righteous rejoice, there is great glory, but when the wicked arise, men hide themselves. And the next one will be found in chapter 29 and verse 2, and I'm going to reserve studying it to when we get there. But notice here when he talks about when the wicked arise. What does it mean for wicked people to arise? What does the word arise mean? Come to power. Rising up. In other words, that you start seeing them. When the wicked arise, men hide themselves. What do you mean hide themselves? Well, not necessarily a shame, but I mean they don't show themselves publicly. What else? Distance themselves. Often they don't speak up. But when the wicked get into a position of power, the righteous people have to avoid being exposed. I thought about this morning talking about Elijah. And why did Elijah think he was alone? Okay, he was feeling like I'm the only one standing up and doing something, publicly. Well, you may not be the only one who believes that and doing what's right, but you may feel like you're alone in doing things. I know you maybe where you work, you're trying to stand up and do the right thing at work, and people around you look like but you may find out there's somebody else over there who's not doing what they're doing. You're trying to do right like you are, but maybe trying to hide themselves. But if you look, it says the word but, that's the contrast that's here. Well, for some reason I'm not connecting. But when they perish, the righteous increase. Now, what do you mean that the righteous increase? When the wicked perish, they come out of hiding. But not only do they come out of hiding, what else happens? They rejoice. The believers. Is wickedness, can it be contagious to people? Can righteousness also be contagious? Yes. When people see somebody stand up and it appears that, that righteousness is going on, people sometimes say, that's right. I think I'm going to stand up and do what's right. There's a certain group of people who are going to avoid that kind of conflict. Okay, let's go to verse 1 of chapter 29, because there's some things in chapter 29, in my judgment, that relate to Rehoboam, who will be the ruler, Solomon in trying to prepare him. And part of chapter 28 also related to that. That's good observation there. Okay, let's go to chapter 29, verse 1 now. He who is often rebuked and hardens his neck will suddenly be destroyed, and that without remedy. Let's notice the word often rebuked. What does it mean to be rebuked? Corrected. Are there some people who have to be corrected repeatedly? Over and over again. And what kind of people do not receive rebuke very well? Fools do. Selfish people. Wicked people. To do that, you really are saying, I think I'm smarter than you are. I think about people at work. You come along, you have somebody, and he's at work, and you try to correct him, and he doesn't like it very much. You come back and you have to correct him again. Why do you have to keep correcting him? He's hard-headed. He thinks he already knows it all. I mean, he thinks, I'm smarter than you are. We pick on the young people who get out of college sometimes. You know why we pick on them? It's because we've been there. We've often had that idea that we're so smart now, why does the boss not see the things the way I do? Well, there's a reason why he does it, because he's had more experience than you have. But he who is often rebuked and hardens his neck. What do you mean harden? What does the figure mean, harden your neck? They're stubborn. The Bible talks about stiff-necked. Now, every once in a while, it's not very often, I will sleep in a bad position and I get up and I have what I call a crick in my neck. And if I get up and somebody speaks, instead of me turning my head, you know what I do? I have to turn. It's a stiff neck. But there are some people who don't want to turn their heads because they don't want to listen, they don't want to learn. So he said the person who's often rebuked and stiffens his neck or hardens his neck will suddenly be destroyed. What's the meaning of the word sudden? Quickly, not delayed. It suddenly will be destroyed, and that without remedy. In other words, there's nothing you can do to help them. And so he's trying to say, if you're the kind of person who won't listen and won't learn, you are going to fall, and when you do, there's not going to be any hope for you. There's not going to be any help for you as well. And sometimes we find ourselves facing that. There's a couple other passages which I think are helpful. Chapter 6 and verse 15, as well as chapter 28 and verse 18. Chapter 6 and verse 15 says, therefore his calamity shall come suddenly. Suddenly he shall be broken and without remedy. And in chapter 28, verse 18, whoever walks blamelessly will be saved, but he who is perverse in his ways will suddenly fall. Solomon's trying to tell us there's some things that will happen to you, and it's going to just happen immediately, quickly. And so there's no remedy for it. It's self-destructive behavior to be stubborn. That's a really good way to put it. It's self-destructive to be stubborn. I have seen people who lose their jobs and they go to the next job, and guess what happens? They lose that job. And you know what they always blame? I had a bad boss. Guess what? I went and had another bad boss. And then I guess I had another bad boss. And the person never says, well, could it be me? And, okay, let's go to verse 2. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked man rules, the people groan. Now, let's not be modern with this. Let's go back and look at Solomon and Solomon's son. When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. That's the first part of it. What is he telling Rehoboam? Mm-hmm. Okay. Stanley? Well, let me see if I can put it in a realistic terms. When you have a righteous ruler, that means that justice is fair to you. If you go to court and let's say somebody has mistreated you and you've got a righteous man in authority, are you going to get what you deserve? Yes. If a righteous are in authority, are you going to be treated fairly with regards to taxation? Yes. If the righteous are in authority, will they praise what is good and punish what is bad? Romans 13? Yes. So if I am appreciative of good things happening, and then I will rejoice when the righteous are in authority. But then he contrasts that with this but, when the wicked man rules, the people groan. Why do they groan? Okay. Let me offer you some parallel passages which I think can be helpful here. I think we see it all, but if you go back to chapter 11 and verse 10, he says, when it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices, and when the wicked perish, there is jubilation. In chapter 28 and verse 12, he said, when the righteous rejoice, there's great glory, but when the wicked arise, men hide themselves. And then chapter 28, verse 28, when wicked arise, men hide themselves, but when they perish, the righteous increase. I think what you say, when there is a righteous ruler, not only is there good being done toward you, but good arises from everybody else as well. When wicked people are ruling, not only does that rule not treat you fairly, but it suppresses goodness as well and raises wickedness. If you look at some of these countries that are operating where you've got dictators, what happens to some of the outlying areas? How are people treated? The people who are your local rulers, they accept bribes and they're constantly, trying to up themselves at your expense. So there's a lot to be said here about this. Now, I think most of us today can see a modern application in it, but rather than our becoming political, the best thing to do is to observe the principles and make sure we appreciate what is taught there. Let's look at verse 3 now. Whoever loves wisdom makes his father rejoice, but a companion of harlots wastes his wealth. Now, we're talking about a father here, and we're talking about a father rejoicing. Has Solomon talked about good sons and good daughters? And mostly good sons because he's focusing on the role of a father. How many want to have a child that's just a moral degenerate? How many wants to have the one that's always in trouble with the law? The one who's always wasting his money? The one who never can seem to do anything or be anything worth anything? I think most of us would say, I want a good child. I want one that succeeds. I want one that has a good reputation. And so if one loves wisdom, he makes his father happy. He makes him rejoice because he brings delight to him. But he says the one that's a companion of harlots, what that means, he frequents the harlots. He's one involved in the participation in prostitution. He said he wastes his wealth. You know what the word waste is in the New Testament? Prodigal. We talk about the prodigal son. We tend to think the word prodigal means somebody who went off and then came back, but that's not what the word means. The word means wasteful. And that's why when he goes into the far country and he wastes his living. That's what the word prodigal means. And so there's several passages here. Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 1 says, a wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is grief to his mother. In chapter 15 and verse 20, it says, a wise son makes his father glad, and a foolish son despises his mother. And then in chapter 23 and verse 15, and then verses 24 and 25. He says, my son, if your heart is wise, my heart will rejoice. Indeed, I myself. Verses 24 and 25, the father of the righteous will greatly rejoice, and he who begets a child will delight in him. Verse 25, let your father and mother be glad, and let her who bore you rejoice. And then one more in chapter 27 and verse 11. My son, be wise and make my heart glad, that I may answer him who reproaches me. There's a whole lot in that about being a good child and being respectful of what your parents have taught you to be. Okay, let's go to verse 4 now. The king establishes the land by justice, but he who receives bribes overthrows it. Now, I mentioned again that much of this is focused on what Rehoboam will learn about being a ruler. And it says he establishes the land, and the parallel to it is overthrows it. What does it mean to establish something? So, make it strong. You know, it's the way it's set up and it's developed and how well it lasts. And the land is established by justice. If you want to make a successful country, let's say, for instance, there's a part of the world that's not been inhabited, and a group of people want to go and establish a new nation there. You remember what our forefathers said? We establish a new nation founded upon the principles of life and liberty and justice. You want to establish a land that is ruled by righteousness and justice. That's the way you do one. But if you receive bribes, you overthrow it. You're weakening it. You're making it crumble and fall from within. Well, Solomon has talked a lot about bribes. In chapter 15 and verse 27, it says, he who is greedy for gain troubles his own house, but he who hates bribes will live. In chapter 17 and verse 23, it says, a wicked man accepts a bribe behind the back to pervert the way of justice. In chapter 21 and verse 14, a gift in secret pacifies anger, and a bribe behind the back, strong wrath. Solomon is saying bribes are not good for the nation. They're not good for a king. It causes the foundations to be weakened. And if you look, what if our country starts living on bribes? Every judge that you have who makes his decision, okay, who's going to pay me the most money? That'll be who I decide for. And then there becomes all kinds of disputes because people know that they can go and pay the judge and win their case. And then pretty soon we have people who are making decisions based upon who will give me the most money. And then what you have is a world that is ruled by injustice rather than justice. And I will tell you, I'm concerned about some of our country today. There's a lot of bribery that's given in the sense, okay, we'll give you money if you'll vote for this. And that's all in the world it is bribery. When you start holding something out for people to get them to do what you want them to do. Mm-hmm. So such a level of corruption that it goes all the way to the top. Yeah, I know a lot of our missionaries have found themselves trying to go into some countries, and they'll get to the border and they've got all their paperwork in hand, and the people there at the border will say, no, you can't come in right now. And they'll say, but now for 100 whatever, you can come on in. And if you say, well, I'm not going to pay a bribe, you know what happens? Go sit on the little stool over there for about a week and we'll see if you'll pay a bribe. That's their way of doing business. That's what they, and of course that corruption goes everywhere. Let's go to verse 5. Well, I don't know about some specifics of other countries. I do know what some have said about the situation they are in personally, and it does become a real challenge attempting to do what's right. Verse 5, I think, goes along with this idea of justice and righteousness. A man who flatters his neighbor spreads a net for his feet. What is flattery? False praise. When you tell someone we call it polishing their apple, or brown nosing, whatever you want to call it. It's a person when they try to tell someone how much they esteem them, they praise them when they really don't mean it. Solomon has talked about this a whole lot. I'm not going to look at all the verses, just 2 or 3 I think are helpful. In chapter 28 and verse 23, we looked at it last week. He who rebukes a man will find more favor afterward than he who flatters with the tongue. I think that when we studied that verse, the value of that is that, if you tell me where I'm messing up right now, I may not appreciate it now, but afterwards I appreciate you were trying to tell me the truth. You were trying to help me. But if a person flatters you and later you find out he was trying to undermine you, you have to be very careful. In chapter 26 and verse 28, he said, a lying tongue hates those who are crushed by it, and a flattering mouth works ruin. So a person here who flatters his neighbor, he said he is spreading a net for his feet. What do you spread a net for? Catch something. In other words, like you've got a bird, maybe you're going to spread a net, the bird lands on you, you're going to, or maybe some other animal, you're going to capture it. The idea of flattery is to try to undermine someone to the point you can take advantage of them. Fatten him up for the kill. That's, you're trying to prepare him to take advantage of him. Well, let me ask you, are there ways in which people can flatter people for gain in a religious sense? I want you to go with the New Testament to 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 5. Paul says something which I think is very important. When Paul and others came preaching at Thessalonica, which would have been Silas, by the way, and Timothy, he says, for neither at any time did we use flattering words, as you know, nor a cloak of covetousness. God is witness. Now, there's 2 things in that. Could you persuade someone to do what you want them to do, maybe to get them to be baptized or whatever else, by trying to flatter them? Well, you tell someone, you're a good person. You really don't have any sin. We just want to baptize you. Some people are doing things for the numbers. No. They're doing it so I can put a little notch on my belt. Okay, I baptized 400 people, or I baptized, 23 people, or I've done this, or they're trying, their motive is not right. And they're using flattery for the purpose of taking advantage of someone else. But in the latter part of this verse, in 1 Thessalonians 2:5, I think it's obvious what the flattery is for. Nor a cloak of covetousness. And I use the word greed. I think most of us don't use the word covetous, but the idea is greed. I've got a good friend he's preaching at a denominational church, and he's railing against all of these TV evangelists who are raking in millions and millions of dollars. And, what you see among them is this telling you you're okay. God doesn't care about your problems, your past. You just do this, send me a little money, and you're going to get to go to heaven. And I thought it was funny. I don't know if any of y'all read this last week, but there was a preacher in Arkansas had asked the church to give him a new watch, a new expensive watch. And he'd been asking since the first of the year. And so last Sunday or Sunday before last, he got up before the congregation and just chewed them out. Says, I can't believe y'all didn't buy me that new watch yet. And I think they were about ready to let him go, and then all of a sudden he had a change of heart. But this is not a guy at a huge church. This is one who's just, but you know, if it's a cloak of covetousness, you're telling people something they want to hear so that it can benefit you. Well, you need to read the article, because he told me, he said, y'all could even go to Sam's and buy that watch. But the problem is he was looking at people to serve him rather than to serve the Lord. And that's what Paul is trying to say. We don't do that. We don't flatter people for the benefit of the cloak of covetousness, trying to get you. In fact, he told, we're not out for you or we're not out for yours, but we're for you so that we can present you to the Lord. And so flattery is a real problem. Mm-hmm.
And so then you may say, and that's not, so it's more righteous to give good correction or righteous correction. And help them understand the error or whatever the road to correction may not be short. It may be a long direction. It may take some time. But when you're flattering, you're trying to flatter this person. Like you said, the different types of people will say, you're okay, you're a good person, you're nice, I know you did this or you've not done whatever the issue may be. But you're not helping them by just making them feel better, by giving them the wrong help.
Let me tell you what I come up with. This is verbal bribery. Isn't it? Isn't flattery verbal bribery? Not all bribery has to be money. It's something of value, and so it could be verbal bribery. Okay, that leads me to verse 6. By transgression, an evil man is snared, but the righteous sings and rejoices. Now, I spent a little bit of time trying to understand here. You've got, first of all, the contrast between the evil and the righteous. That's normal. But you've got, second of all, what is the outcome is a man is snared versus one who sings and rejoices. But the moral of this proverb is this, that transgression or sin snares or captures the evil man. In other words, when he is evil and he practices evil, that's going to catch him. Does sin have a way of ensnaring a person? Yes. A person thinks he's the master of his sin, and pretty soon the sin masters him. He serves it. And Jesus said that a man who sins is a slave of sin. That's the reason when you go to John 8, verse 32, he says, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free, instead of being a slave to sin. Well, the second thing he says, though, the righteous man doesn't have to worry about being ensnared. And so he's able to sing, he's able to rejoice, he's happy with his life. And I think that sometimes people look at Christians and think, boy, they have a poor, miserable life. And those who are Christians say, every day is a day of joy for me. And the sinful man is the one who's really owned by all of his vices. Tell the truth, and it's all going to go well for you. Well, I think Solomon is trying to talk about bribery, flattery, And now he's saying, by transgression, an evil man is snared. You keep sinning, and it's going to catch you. You're going to pay for it. But if you do what's righteous, you can sing, you can rejoice. Being a good ruler has its benefits to it and has its good that you can come from it. Okay, let's go to verse 7 now. The righteous considers the cause of the poor, but the wicked does not understand such knowledge. Again, you have the righteous contrasted with the wicked, but the commonality here is considering the cause of the poor. Now, what would that mean, to consider the cause of the poor? And I really want to key on this one word right here, cause. Okay. The word cause is a special way. He doesn't say just considers the poor, he considers the cause of the poor. The word cause is a legal term, and it describes his situation in a legal matter. Now, if you're a man given to bribery, and here's a poor man who comes in front of you, and here's a rich man comes in front of you, what are you going to do if you're a man given to bribery? You don't go what the rich man tells you to do. But he says the righteous considers the cause of the poor. Let me take you to some passages which I think will make this a little clearer. Let's go back to chapter 22, and let's look at verses 22 and 23. Chapter 22, verses 22 and 23. He said, do not rob the poor because he is poor, nor oppress the afflicted at the gate. For the Lord will plead their cause and plunder those who plunder them. You see, here's a matter of concern for the poor man who's got a cause, and he says there, the Lord will plead their cause. He's going to take care of the poor man. And the righteous also considers the cause of the poor. Jumping forward to chapter 31 and verse 9, he says, open your mouth, judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and needy. When he says, open your mouth, speak for them, judge righteously, don't judge according to bribes or other things such as that. Plead the cause of the needy and the poor, of the poor and the needy. And then Psalms chapter 140 and verse 12. He says, I know the Lord will maintain the cause of the afflicted and justice for the poor. God always listens to those who are in need. And then one last one, chapter 21 of Proverbs, verse 13. He says, whoever shuts his ears to the cry of the poor will also cry himself and not be heard. I think all of these verses, if you put them together as a whole, you see that Solomon is saying, Rehoboam, do you want a good kingdom? You want people to rejoice? You want everybody to be happy? You want everybody to be fairly treated? Don't take bribes. Don't practice flattery or receive flattery, maybe is the other way to put it. Make sure that you are concerned with the cause of the poor, those who are the downtrodden, those who are the needy. Give them justice. Give them fairness. Do you see the picture as a whole of what he's talking about here? Are we going to be a society that respects those who are poor and needy, and they may not have the ability to defend themselves? And what is he expecting us to do as righteous people? Righteous judgment. Also pursue righteous leaders who treat people fairly and righteously as well. That leads me to verse number 8. Scoffers set a city aflame, but wise men turn away wrath. What do you mean when you talk about scoffers? What is a scoffer? Makes fun of somebody else, mocks someone else. The lexicon says the word means mockery, scoffing, hostile speech of fools. I thought that was interesting. Hostile speech of fools. Yeah. I would put it troublemakers. You know, troublemakers set a city aflame. They are doing everything that they can to try to stir up and foment anger and wrath. But wise men turn away wrath. They're doing what they can to try to calm things down. And you think about justice in a society. Are there people who are constantly trying to create conflict? Yes. And if you go back to chapter 22 and verse 10, he said, "Cast out the scoffer, and contention will leave. Yes, strife and reproach will cease." You know, I think in our country, we've got some people, for whatever reason they're involved in, they want to keep trouble stirred up all the time. Agitators, you can call them that. They're wanting to create conflict between the races, conflict between the haves and the have-nots, conflict between regions and areas. In other words, it's a constant, you know, let's see if we can get trouble stirred up. What they're doing, yeah. Some people revel in creating conflict, but in so doing, they're destroying where they live. I noticed the other day that Cracker Barrel is leaving Portland, Oregon. Do you know why they're leaving Portland, Oregon? That's a city where a couple of years ago was burning with fire. Businesses were being burned and buildings were being destroyed. People were rioting in the streets. And now they said, we don't have any good place to go eat. We don't have any good place to go buy anything. Well, there are people who don't realize they're destroying the fabric of their society, and they're hurting themselves. And that's the reason why wise men turn away wrath. They know that it's better to calm a situation. I've seen people who are constantly trying to get people to fight with one another. When I was probably 10th or 11th grade, we had a guy in our class who constantly would try to go and get two other guys to get involved in a fight. Yeah, they're constantly trying to egg it on and get people into conflict, you know. And you wonder, why are they doing that? It's just making life worse for everybody involved. And so Solomon is trying to say, scoffers set a city aflame. Well, if you go back to chapter 22 and verse 10, what's the solution? Get rid of the scoffer, and it'll cease. Sometimes people get caught up into a mob mentality. But if you take the person who's stirring up the mob and take him out of the picture, what happens? That goes away. Well, we've got time for about one more verse here, verse 9. If a wise man contends with a fool, or foolish man, whether the fool rages or laughs, there's no peace. That is a verse that's just, to me, remarkable because of what he says here. I actually want to go back for just a second. I just noticed I put something in my notes that I had skipped over. I want to go back to this wise men turn away wrath. I want to use sometimes we use the examples of men, but there's some really great women in the Bible. And there's a woman by the name of Abigail. How many of you know who Abigail is? You know what her husband's name was? Nabal, which means a fool. And let me give you a little bit of background. David comes into this area, the Jezreel Valley, and he approaches Nabal, and Nabal's been well protected. He's been able to operate in peace, and David asked him for some help. And in 1 Samuel chapter 25 and verses 10 and 11, it says, Then Nabal answered David's servant, Who is David? Who is son of Jesse? There are many servants nowadays who break away from their own master. And shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed from my shears and give it to men who I do not know where they're from? And then David said to his men, Every man gird his sword, and every man girded his sword. And David also girded on his sword. And about 400 men went with David, and 200 stayed with the supplies. What was David going to do to Nabal? Take him out. But if you drop down to verses 32 and 33 of 1 Samuel 25, then David said to Abigail, Blessed is the Lord God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. And blessed is your advice, and blessed are you, because you have kept me this day from coming to bloodshed, from avenging myself from my own hand. Abigail told David, You know what kind of man you're dealing with? He's a fool. Now, that's a bad thing to say about your husband, but that's who he was. And she sought a resolution rather than conflict. That's exactly what verse 8 says, but wise men turn away wrath. She knew it would be better for all of her husband's people, and it would be better for David if there was no conflict that took place. She saved his life, and she actually saved Nabal's, but Nabal ended up dying anyway from the Lord. But David didn't take his life. And sometimes when we are looking at people, we need to find a good resolution. One other passage, and that's found in 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 9 through 12. And there Peter says, Not returning evil for evil, reviling for reviling, but on the contrary blessing, knowing that you were called to this, that you may inherit a blessing. For he who would love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers, but the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. So Peter's saying, you want a wonderful life, you want a blessed life, you want a good life, pursue what is good and pursue what is righteous. Well, I said I was going to get to verse 9, but that'll have to be for next Sunday.